The leaders of Nazism did not only cause death and destruction, they also left behind families, with children who bore a past they never chose. Many grew up amidst luxury, rigid rules, and total obedience, unaware of what their parents were doing while massacres and deportations were taking place. Some were born in mountain chalets, others lived in official residences. Their daily lives were filled with games, solemn portraits, and routines cared for by nannies, cooks, or bodyguards. They did not understand why their last names instilled fear. When Germany surrendered, their lives changed abruptly. Names that once opened doors became a heavy burden to bear. Some were arrested or interrogated, others rejected in schools, watched by authorities, or persecuted for their family ties. Many decided to hide their identity. Some tried to understand without justifying. Several defended their parents, and there were those who chose to remain silent. What does one do when their family's past becomes a lifelong condemnation? Gudrun Himmler, bound to Nazism until death. Gudrun Himmler was born on the 8th day of August, 1929. She was the only daughter of Heinrich Himmler and Margarete Boden, a Protestant nurse. From a young age, she lived in an environment filled with nationalism and racism. Her father, obsessed with the pure race, oversaw every aspect of her life, her studies, routines, and even her friendships. Often he took her on official visits, including one to Dachau, where she appears in a photo surrounded by high-ranking officials. Gudrun adored her father and affectionately called him Papa Viajero. Their relationship was close. They spoke on the phone every day, and he sent her flowers and sweets. When Himmler was appointed Minister of the Interior, she proudly wrote in her diary, "Papito, Minister of the Reich, I am crazy with joy." At 12 years old, she already spoke of the war as something personal. In June 1941, she wrote about her anguish over the attack on the USSR. Although everything was worsening for Germany, she firmly believed in victory due to her complete trust in her father. That changed in 1945 when defeat was imminent, and her family had to abandon their home in Gmünd. In May 1945, at only 15 years old, she was captured with her mother in northern Italy. Both were handed over by a former collaborator of Himmler. They passed through detention centers in Italy and France before being transferred to Nuremberg, where Gudrun discovered the crimes attributed to her father. When she learned of Himmler's suicide on the 23rd day of May, she fell into a physical and emotional crisis that left her bedridden for weeks. She never accepted that version. She always believed he had been assassinated. That conviction accompanied her throughout her life. During her detention, she was forced to use the name Schmidt to protect her identity. She soon rejected it. "My name is Himmler." Enough with the farce. From then on, her goal was to defend her father's honor at all costs. Released in 1946, Gudrun and her mother took refuge in a Protestant convent. They were registered as mentally weak to avoid reprisals. Gudrun did not cry or show emotions. She repeated over and over, "I want to be like my father." She tried to return to normalcy, but her last name was a constant obstacle. In 1947, she wanted to study art, but was rejected when they found out who she was. Finally, she accessed vocational training thanks to a social democratic politician who argued that children should not bear the guilt of their parents. She learned sewing, but every time someone recognized her name, she lost her job or home. She never hid her identity. "My father was the Reichsführer SS," she affirmed without hesitation. Instead of renouncing her past, Gudrun became a key piece of a network that protected Nazi criminals. In 1951, she joined Stille Hilfe, Silent Help, which provided financial and legal aid to imprisoned or hiding ex-Nazis. She also helped found Viking Jugend, a neo-Nazi youth organization that was banned in 1994. In Munich, she lived surrounded by Nazi objects, photos, medals, busts of her father. She even traveled to London in 1955 to participate in an event with the son of Ribbentrop, another Nazi leader. For years, she visited the criminal Anton Malloth and helped wanted Nazis like Eichmann and Barbie. She also supported the neo-Nazi Klaas Faber in operations to prevent his extradition. She married Wolf-Dieter Burwitz, a Nazi sympathizer, and had children. They lived near Munich. One of her sons became a prosecutor. Despite social rejection, Gudrun never distanced herself from her father's ideas. She was linked to the far-right NPD party and participated in nostalgic Nazi events in Austria. She only spoke to the press once, in 1959. She always avoided the media. "I do not talk about my work," she said when asked about her role in Stille Hilfe. She died on the 24th day of May 2018, at 88 years old, loyal to Himmler's legacy until the end. Victim, ally or continuator. Gudrun Himmler represents an extreme case among the children of Nazi leaders. Her emotional bond with her father was so deep that she could never accept his responsibility in the Holocaust. She not only defended him, she also spread his ideas. While some descendants, like Catherine Himmler, have written about their family from a critical perspective, Gudrun preferred to continue defending Nazism until her last days. She never expressed remorse or doubt. She was an active ideological heir who dedicated her life to protecting her father's legacy and helping other Nazis. Her story reflects the weight of education, family idolatry, and denial. She was not simply a victim of her context. She chose to remain loyal to the darkest project of the 20th century. The Princess of the Reich. On the 2nd day of June, 1938, Edda was born, the only daughter of Hermann Göring, who led the Third Reich's Air Force, and Emmy Sonnemann, a renowned actress in Weimar. Her arrival was treated as a national event. 500 aircraft flew over Berlin to celebrate it. Had she been a boy, there would have been twice as many. Her baptism was celebrated on the 4th day of November of that same year at Karinhall, her father's hunting lodge. Hitler, as godfather, attended the event. Among the many gifts she received, a Renaissance painting by Lucas Cranach the Elder, courtesy of the city of Cologne, stood out. Images of her alongside her father circulated on thousands of postcards throughout the country. Edda's childhood took place at Karinhall, a mansion surrounded by forest, about 60 kilometers from Berlin. This luxurious residence had a swimming pool, a private cinema, a zoo, miniature trains, and a museum with art stolen by her father. As a gift from the Luftwaffe, she received a dollhouse, a replica of the Potsdam Palace, with every luxurious detail. She was affectionately called Eddeline. Her education was in the hands of governesses, and her parents offered her all kinds of care. While the country was at war, she lived as if in a fairy tale, without hardships or fears. Her father organized theatrical performances just for her, and dedicated a great deal of his time to her. From a very young age, she was surrounded by famous visitors and regime leaders. She met figures such as Mussolini, the Dukes of Windsor, or Charles Lindbergh. It was even said that when Edda started walking, a Reich autobahn was closed so she could practice. As the conflict came to an end, on the 31st day of January, 1945, she and her mother escaped from Obersalzberg due to the advance of the Soviet army. Göring ordered the destruction of Karinhall to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, but first sent his art collection to Berchtesgaden using special trains. The family took refuge in a medieval castle in Austria called Mautendorf. From there, Göring tried to take control of the Reich, following a decree that positioned him as the successor in case of Hitler's incapacity. However, the Führer accused him of treason and ordered his arrest. On the 23rd day of April 1945, the SS placed the residence under surveillance. No one could communicate, and everyone was locked up separately. During that confinement, Edda was very frightened. The bombings forced her to take refuge with her mother in the basements, while her father was isolated in a cave without ventilation. She cried often, anguished by the thunder and the darkness. With the change of soldiers in charge of custody, surveillance became more flexible, and they were able to move to Fishhorn Castle. On the 7th day of May, the Americans detained them. An official allowed them to spend one last night in the castle before proceeding. Edda, from the back seat of a limousine, burst into tears when she saw her father being taken away. 2 days later, he was photographed with a Texas flag in what would be his last free image alongside his family. For her 7th birthday in June 1945, Edda was already separated from her father. With her mother, she was sent to Waldenstein Castle. There she wrote a letter that was never delivered. "I miss you very much and love you with all my heart. I pray for us every night. "A Million Kisses from Your Edda." In October, Emmy was arrested again and taken to the prison in Straubing. For a time, Edda was left alone in a nearby village. Later, they were able to reunite. They shared a cell and slept on a mattress with a blanket that, according to them, had been a gift from Mussolini. For Christmas, 1945, a prisoner dressed as St. Nicholas gave her chocolates to cheer her up. By February of the following year, both regained their freedom, without resources or a home. An American journalist helped them settle in a hunting lodge in Sackdilling, where Emmy resumed her daughter's education. The family of Goering's first wife also provided them with economic support. From that moment on, their lifestyle changed completely. In March, they were able to write to Goering, who was detained in Mondorf-les-Bains, Luxembourg, receiving treatment for his morphine addiction. During his confinement, they were allowed to visit him a couple of times in Nuremberg. On the 18th day of September, Edda saw him through a glass during a special event for children of prisoners. The 30th was her last visit. On the 15th day of October, 1946, Hermann Goering took his own life with a cyanide capsule just before his execution. Edda was only 8 years old. Emmy did not hide the facts and explained to her daughter what had happened, convinced that she should be honest with her. In 1947, Emmy was detained again as part of the denazification process. Edda, at 9 years old, feared that her mother could receive the death penalty. Finally, Emmy was sent to the Göggingen camp and in 1948 sentenced to 1 year of forced labor, partial loss of property, and a 5-year ban on practicing her profession. That same year, Edda was enrolled in the St. Anna Girls' School in Sulzbach-Rosenberg. For the first time, she received classes in a formal institution. She completed her studies in 1958. Her graduation thesis was titled, "Can Forgetting Be a Blessing and a Risk at the Same Time?" In 1949, she faced a lawsuit over the gifts she received as a child, including the Cranach painting. The authorities argued that they were gifts made because of her father's position, and the matter ended up in court. She tried to study law but dropped out. Later, she obtained a university degree in Munich. She never renounced her father, nor tried to disassociate herself from the past. Like Gudrun Himmler, she idealized her progenitor. She thought he was not directly responsible for the extermination of Jews, despite having signed an order in 1941 authorizing Heydrich to execute the final solution. After Emmy's death in 1973, Edda remained alone in Munich. She maintained an apartment decorated with objects, photographs and memories related to her father and the Third Reich. She participated in events organized by far-right groups, such as those led by Winifred Wagner, and remained in contact with Nazi sympathizers. She refused to give interviews, but in a telephone conversation stated, "I love my father very much. You can write that." Some members of her family made radically different decisions. Bettina Goering, great-niece of Hermann, chose to be sterilized to not continue the last name. Her brother did the same. Another relative, Matthias Goering, converted to Judaism and moved to Israel. In 2015, when she was 76 years old, Edda filed a lawsuit against the Bavarian parliament claiming goods confiscated from her father after the war. The request was immediately denied. Wolf Rüdiger Hess, the guardian of the last prisoner. One day in May 1941, Rudolf Hess spent some time playing with his little 3-year-old boy. Upon saying goodbye, he hid personal letters and his will among the child's toys and kept a photo of him in his pocket. Dressed in an aviator's uniform, he was preparing for a risky mission that would mark his destiny forever. That same 10th day of May, he took off from Augsburg in a Messerschmitt Bf 110, modified to cover a journey of more than 1,600 kilometers. His objective was to offer a peace treaty directly to the British. He parachuted into the outskirts of Eaglesham and was captured by local authorities and taken into custody. Hitler's reaction was immediate. He called him a traitor and questioned his mental health. Rudolf Hess had come into the world in 1894 in Alexandria, within a well-off family. After fighting as a pilot during World War I, he joined Hitler's party early on and was one of his closest followers. For years, he was considered the natural successor to the Führer until his surprising flight to the United Kingdom. Since 1927, Hess had been married to Ilse Prohl. Their only son, Wolf Rüdiger, was born in 1937 after several failed attempts to conceive, including unconventional medical treatments. He was baptized in a non-Christian ceremony with Hitler as godfather and received gifts from all over Germany. After the failed attempt to negotiate with the Allies, the Hess family was relegated from the circle of power. Ilse moved with the child to Bad Oberdorf, while Rudolf's figure was completely erased from official acts and public portraits. Despite the marginalization, Rudolf maintained contact with his wife and son through letters, first from the United Kingdom and later from Nuremberg and Spandau prison. At the Nuremberg trial, he was sentenced to life imprisonment on charges of conspiracy and crimes against peace. From 1947 until 1987, he lived imprisoned in Spandau, under strict surveillance by the Allied powers. His son was able to visit him on 102 occasions. For decades, the visits were cold and regulated. Physical affection was prohibited. It was not until 1982 that he was able to hug him for the first time. Wolf Rüdiger trained as a civil engineer and, since the 1960s, launched a public campaign to clear his father's name, whom he saw as a misunderstood peacemaker. He refused to perform military service and strongly criticized the official versions of his father's role in the Nazi regime. He always maintained that the conviction was the product of political interests. Throughout his life, he wrote 3 books in which he tried to show another image of Rudolf Hess. Additionally, he led an association dedicated to investigating the circumstances surrounding his death. In 1987, when Rudolf passed away, the authorities concluded that it was a suicide. However, his son did not accept that version. He requested a new autopsy in Munich, whose results suggested signs of possible strangulation. Until the day of his death in 2001, Wolf Rüdiger insisted that the British Secret Services had assassinated his father to prevent his release. He never abandoned that hypothesis, which he maintained in interviews, books, and conferences. In the year 2011, at the decision of his descendants, Rudolf Hess's remains were exhumed and later cremated. The objective was to prevent his grave from becoming a site of pilgrimage for neo-Nazi groups. Despite this measure, each year thousands of people continue to gather in his memory. Wolf Rüdiger Hess's life was strongly marked by his father's figure. He grew up convinced of his innocence and raised his children with that same idea. One of them, Wolf Andreas Hess, created a website dedicated to honoring the memory of his grandfather and was sanctioned in 2002 for Holocaust denial statements. Wolf Rüdiger's story was not unique. Like several descendants of Third Reich leaders, he lived trapped between his family legacy, loyalty to his lineage, and a view of the past that clashed with the historical consensus. He spent his life defending an alternative version of events, never managing to change the dominant narrative. Against his blood, Nicholas Frank's rebellion. At 4 years old, Nicholas Frank was traveling in the back seat of the family car when his mother took him to the Krakow ghetto. Brigitte often went there to buy furs and corsets, ensuring they were of the highest quality. From the window, the child saw motionless bodies and children in rags who looked at him without speaking. Without understanding what was happening, he thought, what could they have done to end up in a place like this? In his home, talking about the ghetto was common. It was mentioned as a place where valuable things could be bought for little money. Brigitte returned happy with carpets, jewels, or fine objects, without showing compassion for the suffering she saw. Once, Nicholas was allowed to get out of the car. Upon entering a house, he witnessed something he would never forget. A man was shouting at an extremely thin elderly woman, screaming that she would soon be dead. That scene accompanied him for years, even when he was writing about his father from his desk, in a room without heating. Since 1939, the Franks lived in Wawel Castle in Krakow. The residence was adapted to the style of the regime, with a Reich flag waving at the top. Luxury reigned: servants, meals served on silver trays, and spacious rooms. Hans Frank administered the general government of Poland from there. His wife referred to him as the King of Poland. In the family, Nicholas was nicknamed the Strange One. His parents paid little attention to him. Hans, cold and sarcastic, often made fun of him. Brigitte, dominant and ambitious, left the upbringing in the hands of nannies. The children were sent to boarding schools or spent long periods in Bavaria, far from the terror that reigned in the occupied territory. Hans Frank, a lawyer by profession, was one of Hitler's first defenders. He was in charge of giving legal form to the Nazi state. In 1939, he was appointed governor of the Polish territory. From his office, he organized mass deportations of Jews to the camps. In his speeches, he came to say that it was better the more Jews died. The older siblings, Norman and Sigrid, attended classes at the German school in Krakow. Meanwhile, the younger ones remained in Germany with a nanny. Nicholas would later remember a visit with his caretaker to a nearby camp, where he witnessed extremely thin men being thrown from donkeys. He, on the other hand, was offered hot chocolate. In 1945, with the war coming to an end, Hans Frank escaped with his family to Bavaria, taking with him valuable paintings stolen, including works by Raphael and Da Vinci. He was captured by American troops on the 4th day of May. Before surrendering, he gave his wife 50,000 marks. According to Norman, he did so without showing any affection. Voluntarily, Hans handed over 40 volumes of his personal diaries to the Allies. In them, he wrote phrases such as, "The Jews must be killed wherever they are." He thought his notes would justify him. He was tried in the Nuremberg trials, where he attempted suicide twice. During his imprisonment, he converted to Catholicism. He was hanged on the 16th day of October, 1946. Nicholas, at 7 years old, did not cry. He remembered that his father had promised to spend Christmas together. They never said goodbye as if he were a criminal. In 1947, Brigitte Frank was arrested and transferred to the Göggingen camp, along with other wives of high-ranking officials. She shared a cell with Ilse Hess and Emmy Goering. Nicholas visited her 4 times. Brigitte, after her release, said that that time was like wonderful vacations. The family went through difficult times afterward. They lived with few resources. Nicholas was admitted to a school on the island of Föhr, where he found some peace. He studied law, literature and history, but did not complete any degree. He dedicated himself to journalism, writing for many years in the magazine Stern. In 1993, he published his book, My Father, A Confession Without Mercy, where he expressed deep contempt for Hans Frank, calling him a murderer, coward, and servile. For a long time, he carried with him a photo of his father's corpse. He became obsessed with the images of the concentration camps and tried to imagine himself inside them. He used to say, "His guilt is the inheritance we carry." He never forgave his mother, whom he saw as a cruel and conscienceless woman. In 1959, during a hospital visit, he tried to kill her by giving her pills. She died on the 9th day of March, the same day as his birthday. Norman, his brother, moved to Argentina in 1951. There he was recognized by Nazi groups and ended up working in a mine. He later returned to Germany, where he lived in the former family home. Although he admired Nicholas's courage, he never renounced his love for his father. In his room, he hung a portrait of Hans Frank above the bed. He passed away in 2009, alone and affected by alcohol. On his grave, Nicholas wrote, "Now you are free from the pain that loving Dad so much caused you." The other siblings never recognized the atrocities committed by their progenitor. Sigrid moved to South Africa, defended apartheid, and denied the Holocaust. Brigitte, ill with cancer, took her own life in 1981. Michael, another of the children, passed away overweight in 1990. Niklas, the only surviving son of Hans Frank, became his father's chronicler. He openly denounces other descendants of Nazis who seek to justify their parents. About Martin Bormann Jr., he wrote, "It is disgusting to try to whitewash someone's guilt behind the image of a tender dad." Currently, he lives with his wife in northern Hamburg. He gives talks in schools. He believes that many people in Germany still feel sympathy for the Nazi regime. He often repeats, "I love the Germans, but I do not trust them." Martin Adolf Bormann, From the Reich to the Priesthood. On the 25th day of April, 1971, a white Opel collided head-on with a US military truck. The driver was trapped among the twisted metal, severely injured. A mechanic who decades earlier had worked for Himmler recognized the injured man. He was the son of the powerful Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary. He was wearing a cassock. The boy he remembered with leather shorts was now a priest. Martin Adolf Bormann was born on the 14th day of April, 1930. He was the firstborn of Martin Bormann and Gerda Buch, and the first godson of Hitler himself. He grew up in Obersalzberg an exclusive area for Nazi hierarchy. His father, one of the most influential men in the regime, managed Hitler's inner circle, controlled his personal finances, and was the executor of his will. His rise to power was consolidated when Rudolf Hess fled to the United Kingdom in 1941, becoming the Secretary General of the Nazi Party. His childhood developed in a closed and controlled environment, surrounded by the children of other Nazi figures. He remembers having seen Mussolini and Chamberlain on official visits. Obersalzberg was constantly remodeled by order of his father. At home, his parents rejected Christianity. In primary school, he was excluded from religion classes. His mother defended polygamy as a way to strengthen the Reich. He had 9 siblings and a sister who died shortly after birth. At 10 years old, his father decided to send him as punishment to the Reich school in Feldafing, where he was only admitted because he was Bormann's son. There he received military training. The adaptation was complicated, but he managed to get used to it. Separated from his parents, he only saw them on vacations. His relationship with his father was distant and authoritarian. He visited him in 1943, and when asked what Nazism was, he firmly replied, "It is to fulfill the Führer's will." In April 1945, the school closed, and the students were dispersed. On the first day of May, he heard on the radio about Hitler's death. The subsequent silence left a mark on him. He left the boarding school wearing his Hitler Youth uniform. An old assistant of his father suggested he burn that uniform, change his identity, and disappear. He adopted the false name Bergmann. He took refuge in a farm in Hinterthal, posing as a child without a family. He was taken in by a religious family. It was there that he had his first real contact with faith. He participated in catechism and, reading the Salzburger Nachrichten, discovered the atrocities of the regime, along with the images of the concentration camps. He understood who his father really was. In 1947, he confessed his true identity to the village priest, who supported him unconditionally. From then on, his life took a different turn. He was baptized as a Catholic on the 4th day of May, 1947. Later, he studied theology and was ordained a priest in 1958. He dedicated his life to religious education. He never saw his father again, whose whereabouts remained unconfirmed. Rumors circulated that he had fled to South America, or even that he was working for the KGB. In 1972, it was confirmed that he had died when his skeleton was found in Berlin. His identity was first confirmed by his teeth and later with genetic tests. After his ordination, he worked as a missionary in the Congo in the 1960s. There he suffered torture and mock executions. When he returned to Germany in 1971, he had a car accident. During his recovery in the hospital, he met a former nun whom he married that same year. From 1973 until his retirement in 1992, he taught religion in various schools. He participated in meetings between descendants of Nazis and Holocaust survivors, organized by the Israeli psychologist Dan Baron. In 1993, he traveled to Israel on an ecumenical mission. He also wrote an essay on how Nazism manipulated language. In those spaces, he affirmed that his silence did not come from trauma, but from the fear of being judged for his father's crimes. He said that each person should bear their own responsibility and that he did not hate his father, although he condemned what he had done. While some of his siblings remained close to their parents' thinking or simply avoided any conversion, he chose to break with that past. Several of his siblings died young or stayed out of the public eye. His sister Ilse, who remained a sympathizer of the Nazi regime, died in 1957. His mother Gerda died in 1946 after having been baptized as well. Martin Adolf always feared that his father might appear one day to reproach him for his life choices. He passed away on the 11th day of March 2013. He was one of the few children of high Nazi officials who completely broke with their father's legacy. His life was marked by pain, transformation, faith, and the attempt to build bridges instead of perpetuating hatred. The children of Rudolf Höss growing up next to hell. Brigitte Höss spent her childhood in a comfortable house located a short distance from Auschwitz, where her father was the commander. The house was well equipped, and they had servants, many of them prisoners from the camp itself. She had access to all kinds of goods that came from the belongings stolen from the victims. Brigitte remembered afternoons playing with dolls made by prisoners, boat rides, and unusual animals in the garden. Sometimes the air was filled with strange smells and ash that settled on the fruit. Her mother warned her to wash the strawberries well because they were covered with black dust, the ashes of incinerated bodies. Rudolf Höss was born in 1901 in Baden-Baden, within a family with strong Catholic roots. His upbringing was marked by strict respect for authority. After a disappointment with his confessor, he distanced himself from religion. He joined a paramilitary group, the Rossbach Freikorps, and was convicted for killing a communist. Although the sentence was 10 years, he was released after only 4. In 1934, he joined the SS at the invitation of Himmler. There he began his training in camps like Dachau and Sachsenhausen, where he learned the functioning of the repression system. In 1940, Höss was assigned to direct Auschwitz. He transformed military installations into a concentration camp and later into an extermination center. A year later, Himmler communicated Hitler's order to put into operation the plan known as the Final Solution. The facilities were expanded, and Auschwitz-Birkenau was built. Zyklon B gas was used for the executions. Höss always alleged that he was following orders and did not consider himself responsible for what happened. He never renounced Nazism and saw his function as a mandate that had to be fulfilled without question. Despite the horror that was happening a few meters away, the family routine continued as if nothing was happening. His wife Hedwig took care of the home and organized gatherings. The children played outdoors, sometimes imitating the scenes they saw among the prisoners. They lived surrounded by comforts with domestic staff and frequent visits from figures like Himmler. Hedwig obtained luxury items in the so-called Canada warehouses, where confiscated articles were stored. The domestic workers remembered a clean and well-cared-for house with well-educated and kind children. In 1943, Höss was replaced as camp chief and took on administrative functions. In 1944, he again played a central role in the massive deportation of Hungarian Jews. At the end of the conflict, he went into hiding using a false identity. His wife was captured in 1946, and under interrogation she revealed his whereabouts. Shortly afterward, he was arrested, testified at the Nuremberg trial, and was handed over to the Polish authorities. There he was tried, sentenced, and executed in the same place he once commanded on the 16th day of April, 1947. After the war, Hedwig and her children faced economic and social difficulties. They moved to the north of the country and lived in modest conditions. Due to their last name and origin, they were objects of contempt. Brigitte moved to Spain, where she began working as a model and later married an American citizen. She lived in various countries and finally settled in the United States. For many years, she hid who she was. She worked in a luxury goods store in Washington, and when the Jewish owners found out about her origin, they decided not to fire her. Rainer Höss, grandson of Rudolf and son of Hans-Jürgen, learned of his lineage at 12 years old. The secrecy in his family led him to investigate. He gathered letters, photos, and documents, and began to distance himself from his relatives. The break was total, and he suffered emotional and physical consequences. He visited Auschwitz, collaborated with survivors, and participated in educational initiatives and against extremism. Although some accused him of wanting to benefit economically from his last name, he denied those allegations. The consequences of the past affected family members unevenly. While some, like Brigitte, chose to ignore the facts or minimize what happened, others, like Rainer, decided to confront them. The contradiction between the memory of an affectionate father and the image of the criminal was constant. Some decided to change their name to leave that burden behind. Others assumed their history as a weight they could not and did not want to hide. The children of Albert Speer, growing up with the burden of someone else's guilt. Albert Speer Jr., the eldest son of the Third Reich's architect, became a renowned urban planner on a global scale. Throughout his professional life, he sought to distance himself from his father's shadow. From his firm AS&P, he led urban projects in Europe, Asia, and the Persian Gulf, even participating in the planning of stadiums for the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. His concepts of modern cities were centered on human well-being and sustainable development, in clear contrast to his progenitor's monumentalist approach. Born in Berlin in 1934, Albert Friedrich Speer spent his childhood in Obersalzberg, where his family lived near Hitler's Berghof. There he shared the environment with the descendants of other high-ranking officials of the regime. The war seemed distant. Life went on between mountains, animals and servants. He played with the children of Goering and Bormann, while his father gained influence as Minister of Armaments. Over the years, Speer Jr. would remember those times with mixed feelings. He attributed his stuttering to the family environment and the absent figure of his father. When the regime collapsed, his life took a drastic turn. They went from living in a luxury residence to a modest two-room apartment. The last name Speer became a burden, especially after the Nuremberg trial in 1946, where his father was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The family moved to Heidelberg, to the grandparents' house. In various schools, he was denied admission because of his last name. At 15 years old, he began training as a carpenter. Later, despite academic difficulties, he managed to enter the Technical University of Munich, where he studied architecture under the tutelage of Hans Dölgast. In 1964, he won a design competition for the Ludwigshafen station anonymously. He always thought that if his name had been known, he would not have been chosen. During the time his father spent in prison, between 1946 and 1966, family relationships were minimal. Visits were brief and lacking in affection. Although they maintained contact by letter, the messages lacked warmth. Hilda, born in 1936, recounted that their responses were prepared as if they were school assignments. Ernst, the youngest son, barely remembered him. When he visited him in Spandau, he remained silent. According to his words, he had nothing to say. Fritz, another brother, felt uncomfortable in front of his father. Arnold seemed more interested in the structure of the visiting room than in the reunion. Meanwhile, Speer Sr. wrote incessantly in prison. He took notes on any available surface, even on toilet paper. He walked daily in circles within the prison courtyard, accumulating kilometers as if he were traveling the world. From his cell, he coordinated with Rudolf Wolters a network of economic support for his family and established aid for the education of his children. When he was released in 1966, his wife received him without enthusiasm. The reunion with his already adult children was distant. He showed no interest in their experiences or emotions. In his personal writings, he wondered if he should try to retake the bond or if it was better to keep his distance. What would they do with a 60-year-old stranger, he came to note. Although there was an ambiguous connection, Albert Friedrich felt respect for his father's career, but recognized the lack of closeness. He said that his father valued his trajectory, although he did not understand his vision. He never renounced the last name, but sought a professional identity of his own. He leaned towards urbanism and architecture focused on sustainability, distancing himself from the monumental style associated with the Nazi past. Hilda, the eldest of the siblings, became a sociologist, environmental activist, and promoter of intercultural dialogue. She participated in local politics and was awarded in 2004 with the Moses Mendelssohn Prize for her work in favor of reconciliation. Initially, the ceremony was to be held in a synagogue, but the Jewish community rejected that idea since she was the daughter of a high Nazi official. Finally, it was celebrated in a church. Hilda accepted that decision with understanding. She also got involved in processes of restitution of works looted during the regime and donated to a Jewish foundation the money obtained from the sale of inherited paintings. Margaret, the youngest daughter, chose photography. In 2007, she published a book titled Are You Speer's Daughter?, in which she narrated what it meant to be the daughter of a criminal of the Reich. In her testimony, she described her father as a distant figure, absorbed by his own need for public redemption. She affirmed that, despite everything, she did not want to erase her childhood memories or bear responsibilities that did not correspond to her. Ernst lived on the same property as his parents, although without establishing an emotional bond. He said that having him close did not equate to having a present father. Fritz and Arnold also maintained an affective distance. Hilda was the only one who kept a closer relationship, helping with the correspondence and the public image of her father until the end of his life in 1981. After being released from prison, Albert Speer tried to rebuild his public image through books, interviews, and conferences. Works such as memoirs or the Spandau Diary achieved great diffusion. However, Documents were later discovered that contradicted his account, demonstrating that he had played an active role in deportations and the organization of the extermination system. His former collaborator Rudolf Walters handed over to a historian texts omitted by Speer in his publications. He died in London in 1981 after traveling there for an interview. He was accompanied by his lover, which aggravated the tension with his family. His sons maintained the last name but never confronted his figure openly. In a 1952 diary, Speer wrote that their father had participated in the leadership of the Reich will be an internal conflict for them for a long time. And so it was. Hilda affirmed that guilt is not inherited, but shame is. In that shame, each one found their way to remember. Rolf Mengele, the son of the doctor who decided who lived and who died. During his childhood, Rolf Mengele grew up without knowing the true identity of his father. Josef Mengele, one of the most wanted criminals after the war, was presented to him as a distant relative. His mother, Irene, told him that he had died in combat as a hero. In reality, that Uncle Fritz, who lived in South America, was his real progenitor. He was 16 years old when he discovered the truth. The impact was devastating. At school, the other kids identified him by his last name. They called him Little Nazi or SS Mengele. The shadow of his father reached him even in the most everyday environments. At home, the subject was still taboo. Outside, the weight of the name made him a pariah. At 33, in 1977, Rolf decided to travel to Brazil to reunite with him. It was the second time he saw him, but the first time he knew who he really was. The meeting was prepared with extreme caution, over 5 years. He used a friend's passport and moved in total anonymity for fear of being discovered by search groups. They spent 2 weeks together. Josef Mengele lived in Sao Paulo, hidden in a simple dwelling. He appeared fragile, nervous, and physically deteriorated. The son he had never raised sat in front of him, not to judge him but to try to understand. Rolf wanted to comprehend how a human being could have acted as he had. During the conversations, his father denied having committed direct crimes. He assured that he only obeyed orders, that Auschwitz was already operating before his arrival, and that his role was to classify those who were fit to work. He never showed remorse. His beliefs remained intact. Although Rolf despised everything his father represented, he never denounced him. He never collaborated with those who pursued him. When Josef died in 1979, drowned on a beach under the alias Wolfgang Gerhard, Rolf received the news from acquaintances. This time he used his real identity. He collected notebooks, letters, sketches, and a watch. He did not hand anything over to the authorities. In 2011, that material was auctioned for nearly $250,000. It was purchased by a descendant of Holocaust victims who considered it should be made public to combat denial. He also did not confirm his father's death immediately. He refused to facilitate genetic samples and did not participate in the exhumation. Fear of public judgment still marked him. When the identity of the remains was officially verified, Rolf chose to remain silent. Part of his decision was to protect those who had supported his father. Another part was to distance himself from the last name. In the 1980s, he made a definitive decision. He left behind the name Mengele and adopted that of his wife. Settled in Munich, he dedicated himself to law. He chose that path to ensure that his children grew up without carrying a history that did not belong to them. He never renounced his origin, but did not accept it as a condemnation either. While some children of high-ranking officials defended or whitewashed the past, he maintained his distance. He felt no hatred, but no affection either. He was a stranger, he said. In 2008, he publicly declared that he wished to visit Israel and Yad Vashem. He did not doubt out of personal fear, but out of respect. He knew that his presence could cause discomfort. Although he affirmed not feeling inherited guilt, he did recognize the symbolic weight of his last name and what it evoked. Rolf Mengele was the only son of a high Nazi official who sat in front of his father and directly asked him what he had done. He did not obtain apologies or signs of repentance, but that experience marked the course of his life. He chose to completely separate himself from that past. He built another identity, far from the echo of one of the darkest names of the 20th century. The history of the children of the Third Reich's hierarchy is not a direct extension of the crimes committed by their parents. but neither can it be completely separated from them. They were born into environments marked by obedience, privilege, and silence. Many were unaware of the magnitude of the events while growing up amid symbols of Nazi power, surrounded by discipline, loyalty, and apparent normality. But after the fall of the regime, their last names became a sign of suspicion, rejection, or shame. Some adopted new identities, broke ties, and sought to build a life far from their origin. Others, however, defended the memory of their parents or chose not to speak. Society's reaction was diverse. There was rejection, stigmatization, attempts at concealment, and even arrests related to their family relationships. What was common to all of them was the impossibility of ignoring what they had inherited. The weight of the past does not disappear with a generation. Despite the passage of time, the names of those responsible remain present as a warning, and their children, marked by memory, were witnesses to how much a history that one did not choose can mold the destiny of those who bear it.